slide, please, every once in a while. So we'll go on to the first slide. Next slide, Cynthia, please. So the objectives today are to review some of the concepts and techniques that will help you have effective clinic team meetings. We also want to address some strategies for managing those meetings, including some challenging personalities and how to deal with those. We're also going to introduce you to some new tools that we haven't shared with you before. Some of them will be tools that are new to some of you and old to others. So that's great. And this the other objective is to encourage you guys as improvement facilitators to help empower your clinic team members to be thinking quality improvement even after the ASaP intervention period is completed. And next slide, please, Cynthia. So just some general tips about your improvement team meetings. You want to be sort of modeling the behavior that sets the tone for the meeting. So you want it to be relaxed and conversational. Just like we try to do at our training sessions, is to really, we want everybody to be able to participate. And I think it's important, too, that it's okay to tell people that it's good to have fun. I know there's often times where other people will walk by the meeting when you're having those team meetings and they hear some laughter coming from there and they start to get curious, and all of a sudden team meetings don't seem quite as onerous as they have in the past. So it is okay to have fun with them. Also, another tip is if you're in the middle of a conversation in a team meeting and all of a sudden everybody just comes to kind of a dead halt and there's no more conversation happening, one of the tips is to just recap what you have covered to this point. Might help to spark some conversation. And don't forget to include your team and ask them, you know, what's something that might be missing? I've recapped it to this point. What am I missing? And don't be afraid to ask those stupid or dumb questions. So, Michelle, I had an example here, and I can't remember what it was.
I think we had just, we usually talk about how sometimes clinics have a way of doing things, that they've always done it that way. And as a fresh set of eyes, you can kind of say, that's interesting. Now, why do you do it that way? And sometimes the answer, the only thing they came up with is, well, that's sort of how it's always been done. That's how it was done when I started here, and we've never really thought about doing it another way. And then you've kind of opened that door for some more creative thinking and maybe some more efficient ways of doing things.
And I did have an example. I just remembered my example. So when you go into the Mazankowski Heart Institute in Edmonton, when the patients register at the desk, the first thing they do is they take all your information and then they put a hospital bracelet on. And you go and the patients will go and do the ECG and see the cardiologist and do the stress test or do whatever they're there to do. And then when they leave, they stop at another desk and someone cuts the arm bracelet off. In between times, no one ever really looks at it. It would be a great question to say to them, you know, what is the purpose of the armband? And I don't know if they could answer the question, but it's just something that they have gotten into the habit of doing. And by asking that question at an improvement meeting, you know, what's the purpose of this? Maybe they start looking at each other going, you know, we used to do it because, but now we're not doing that anymore, so I'm not sure. So when you think of the cost of the bracelet and the time it takes for someone to put it on and take it off when it has no purpose in between, it just gives you that opportunity to ask a question that maybe nobody's asked before. I know someone just joined us, and we're just going to let you know that we are recording this session, so we'll just welcome you at the end. Celebrate all successes. So it doesn't matter how small the success is. You really want to try and encourage that that feeling that they're getting somewhere. So sometimes a small success, we call it the low-hanging fruit. Find something that you can help them to celebrate. And
don't forget the snacks.
Bring snacks. That always gets people encouragement to be at the improvement team meeting. So, all right, next slide, please. So facilitating effective meetings, and we're going to go into each one of these areas just in a little bit deeper. So talking about the agenda, roles, and responsibilities, some meeting norms, managing participation, brainstorming, and the action log. So we'll just move on a little bit to the next slide and talk about agenda. So this is really trying to get from point A to point B in the agenda. Now, I know some of you have already been meeting with your teams and you've been taking an agenda with you. On the next page, the next slide, I'm just going to show you the an agenda template, and I think it's a great idea to take that agenda with you to the first meeting. And then what you want to do is pass it on to the team. If you continue to take that agenda to every meeting, when you leave, there will be no agenda. It will just be something that stops because you as the facilitator has always been taking. So you really want to empower the team, the improvement team at the clinic, and I know some of you are internal facilitators, so this might work a little bit different in your situation. But if you're trying to empower your improvement team, hand that over to someone else, and we do have this template on the website. One thing that we added to that was the aim statement, and we were saying it really is great to start every meeting talking about what aim it is they've set at this clinic so that you know your purpose for being there, and it can help you maintain that focus. Now, these are just some headlines that we put on there to look at the agenda, go through an action log, talk about PDSAs, what are the action items, and next meeting. You can change your titles however you want to whatever works best for your team, and you can provide them with this template so that they can make an agenda for themselves for the next time. Next slide, please. Here's where you can find that on the website. So under ASaP, under Resources and Tools, and under the Improvement Facilitators tab, you'll see circled there additional tools. And underneath there, we've got both an agenda template and an action log template that we'll talk about in a few minutes. Next slide. Well, we're going to talk a little bit now about roles and responsibilities, and I think notice the graphics that Michelle is so good at adding graphics to all of these slides, and they actually do have some meaning to them. So we're just going to move on to the next slide, talk a little bit about roles and responsibilities. So your role as the improvement facilitator really is to manage the group discussion when you first start. I think the whole idea of facilitating yourself out of a job is really important, and I think your job of managing the discussion is there until the team is managing their own discussion. There's nothing more rewarding as a facilitator of kind of going in and having to pull teeth for the first little bit and get everybody to participate and do this and do that, and then walking into a meeting towards the end of the time that you're going to spend with the team, and they don't ask you to say anything. Somebody else is leading the discussion. Somebody else is writing things down. Everything is happening, and you're just there, and that's actually what we're looking for. Team lead. So maybe that is your improvement lead within the clinic. Is it their job to prepare the agenda, and are they the ones that are going to say, okay, when are we meeting again, and are we setting a meeting every week or every 2 weeks, and how are we going to manage those meetings? Who's going to make sure everyone's aware, etc.? The other person that you might have on your improvement team is one of your disciplines that is being represented is maybe the recorder, and they're going to track action items and keep track of those items that go in the parking lot. So maybe they're starting to jump ahead to some solutions, and you're not there yet, but you don't want to lose sight of some of your just that mapping their current state. You don't want to lose sight of some of those good ideas, so maybe they can just put on a parking lot who's responsible for that. And another role that you might give to one of your other team members is that of timekeeper. So monitoring the agenda and warning the group when the time is getting short. I think it is very important. I know it's important. And we try and do this at our training sessions as although things may change throughout the day as far as the agenda, we will not go over in our meeting time, and that's just out of respect for everyone else's time. I think you're more apt to get people coming to meetings if you know the meeting is from 12:30 to 1 and they know they're going to be done at 1. Thanks, Cynthia. Next slide. Meeting norms. So we talk a lot about this, and I don't know if we mentioned it in our training sessions, but it's something that I try and do with every team when I'm first starting with them is set some meeting norms. Next slide, please. So here are some of the examples, and I usually do this by asking the team to set their own norms. So I use the big flip chart paper and ask people to, what do you think is important in the meeting, and what is some of the team norms that you'd like to have for these improvement team meetings. And some that come out are that everyone's opinion counts, start and end on time. We talked about that. No interrupting, trying to stay on task, and be open to new ideas. If there's any conflicts, we're going to deal with them openly. Try to minimize sidebar chats, and no hierarchy in meetings. I always like to call that no leave your title at the door, and also technology is another one. I think it's important when you're doing setting up team norms that you get these from the participants, so that they're not being dictated to. They're participating in their own team meeting norms. And if there's anything that you see that you think is important for that team, but they haven't talked about it, wait until the end, and if there's something that you want to add, ask them. If you don't see this, no hierarchy in teams. It's not in meetings. It's not something that they generally come up with on their own. So that's often one that I'll add in the end. Are you comfortable with leaving titles at the door, that everybody's opinion counts equal when they come in? If they don't agree with that, you're not going to put it as a team norm, but if they agree, then you could add it as a team norm. And of course, technology, and that refers to what are we going to do with our cell phones for this 30-minute meeting. Okay, next slide.
Okay, so we wanted to talk a little bit about managing participation during the actual meeting. And, in the smaller groups, sometimes there's not a lot to manage, but sometimes there is a fair amount for the facilitator to actively take a role to ensure that all voices are heard in a meeting. And so some of the typical cast of characters that you may encounter in the meetings, if we go to the next slide, we'll see the first one. And that is the dominator. So this is a person who tends to talk a lot. Quite often what they're saying is very positive and very helpful, but others aren't being heard, and sometimes they just sort of feel more comfortable sitting back and not even trying to be heard. So as a good facilitator, you're going to try, without treading on the toes of the dominator and making them feel bad, find a way to just keep them contained a bit so that others can also do a little bit of talking. So some techniques that you can try when you have a dominator in the room is, to thank them for their excellent opinion, for that great suggestion. Does anyone else have another idea that might work? You can, again, recognize what they've said and then specifically ask another person who maybe hasn't had a chance to express much yet, what they think about that or what their thoughts are on the topic. You can use specific body language, and these sound kind of bold, but in fact they can be quite effective, and people don't seem to take offense to them. So when we say stop, we sometimes refer to that as traffic cop. And what that looks like is when you ask a question, you're standing near the person who is the dominator. And in our cases in the clinics, we're not always standing. Usually we're all sitting around a table. So you can actually ask the question and then just suddenly put your hand up in the direction of the person who's doing the talking. Direct your attention in the other area of the table. So you're kind of looking a bit away from them with your hand just subtly up toward them, and open your other hand toward the other side of the room. So you're saying, this is the question, and I'm directing it over at this side. So it's not a direct slight to the dominator, but it's a subtle cue that works with some of them, but of course not all. The other thing you can do in the body language department is what we call the aha. So as they're speaking, wait for something that's quite poignant to come up in their statement. And then, you put your finger up like, oh, yes, that's a great point. What about blah, blah, blah? And again, direct it back to the rest of the group. So you're being positive, you're telling them what a great idea they've just had, and you're so excited about it that you have to interrupt them and then direct it back to the rest of the group. You can also, in some cases, use what people will call a talking stick or some object. If you have a group that really competes with each other, if you've got a few dominators in the room, some groups actually do very well having an item that the person who's speaking must be holding. And I know it sounds kind of hokey, but there have been groups that actually function very well when they use it. And Sandy, I think you were saying you had a group just recently that really needed to have, what did they have? What object did they use?
You know what? They had a rubber ball that they had in the clinic, and it had those little fingers sticking off of it. So it kind of became a little bit of fun, too, and it really drew some of the other clinic members in, so they'd laugh because, they were catching this ball and whatnot. But what it did more than anything was they'd have to, if somebody wanted to speak, they had to get the attention, and then they had to be holding the ball before it, because we have some interrupters in the room, and so they had to actually be physically holding the ball before they could speak. And we only used it for a short period of time. It wasn't something that we had to do in this case long term, but it just reminded them that they needed to wait for the other person to be finished and pass them the ball before they could actually speak. It worked very well, and of course they had fun with it as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's just another tool for your tool belt that you might need to draw out in certain situations. In other cases, sometimes it helps if you've got a big enough group that you put people into pairs or small groups and then report back, and again that allows the rest of the group to have a little more participation. Or you can direct a round robin for generating ideas. So you can say, everyone take a moment and think about your idea for a possible solution to this situation, and then you go around and each person gives their perspective. And of course they have the right to pass if they couldn't think of anything, but again it just equalizes the time a little bit. You can also try written brainstorming, and we're going to go into that in a little more detail later on. Again, another opportunity for everyone to participate, even if they're not really comfortable speaking in the group. And then one of our favorite tricks for a dominator is to give them a job. We talked about, we have a scribe, someone who's writing the action items, or someone who's timekeeping. If we give them something to focus on, sometimes that will help them to contain their gregarious ideas a little bit. So some ideas there for the dominator. On the next slide, we have the multitasker. So again, that's the person who just can't leave their iPhone alone. They've got it under the table, thinking that you won't know what they're doing as they're looking down, reading their text or whatever it is they're up to. So this is, we realize in some clinics that, if there's a physician in the room, for instance, sometimes they have to be monitoring their phone, and sometimes they have to take a call when it comes in, and that's okay, but perhaps these are the things that you want to address with the group up front before you even start the meeting, and just say, how do you feel about cell phones and texts and that sort of thing, and they may be very clear in what they find acceptable and what they don't, and so let the group kind of set, again, as part of their norms for their meetings, what they wish to do with that situation. It also sometimes helps, it's often a sign when people are on their phone that they're not really all that interested in being there, that maybe they think that this is not really worth their time, that they've been told to be here, and perhaps they don't really understand what the purpose of the meeting is, what the purpose of ASaP, why we're doing this. And so you might want to start the meeting just by recapping what the big picture is, why we're doing this, and that the goal is to save the lives of patients. And sometimes just having that perspective helps people to focus a little bit better during the meetings. It also sometimes helps to let them know that that we do respect their time, and that we will always start and end on time, and we'll try as much as possible to stay on task during the course of the meeting. And then again, if they're still kind of sitting back and not engaging and spending more time with their phone, you might want to directly try to engage them by asking them a question that you know is in their area, their field of expertise, and maybe something that will get them interested. Or again, as a last resort, if you just can't find a way, you can try to give them one of those jobs and see if at least that will force them to put down the phone and become a little more engaged. Next slide, please. We also mentioned before the sidebar conversationalists. And it's important, I think, to recognize that a lot of the time it's not that people mean to be disrespectful. As ideas come up, though, sometimes they're very excited about what's being discussed and how it's going to be organized in their area. Maybe you've got a couple people who are both in reception sitting together, and they immediately start to talk about how they can do their part in reception. But it's still kind of disruptive to the overall meeting. So we recognize that they're just excited about it. But it's best to kind of get everybody back into the group. So how can we tactfully interrupt them and again, bring the focus back to the rest of the group? So you could call on one of your talkers and ask them a specific question, and that often works to kind of interrupt a little conversation that's going on. You could also interrupt them and directly ask the group members who are participating in this competing conversation to rejoin the group discussion, but you want to do it tactfully without using any sarcasm or anger. So saying something like, oh, I'm afraid we're missing some great ideas when everyone is kind of talking at once. And I know I'm having a bit of trouble to keeping track of all these ideas, so maybe if we can all kind of have one conversation. So just find a way of tactfully addressing and bringing them back in without embarrassing them or making them feel bad. And again, this might be something that if it hasn't already come up in the meeting norms, and we usually try to write those up on a piece of Post-it note paper, the big ones, and we put them up at every meeting if it's a group that really needs to be reminded at every meeting. And if they haven't brought that up in their original go-around when they were setting their meeting norms, you may want to say, is there anything that anyone would like to add to your meeting norms that maybe we missed? And often people will say no sidebar conversation. So you can put that up at that point too. Next slide. So there's often a quiet person who you don't hear a lot from. And sometimes it just takes a little work to bring them out, and then they're comfortable, and then some people just really are never comfortable talking. So first you want to try and remove any obstacles or barriers that are keeping them from participating. So let's say if you know that they are someone with a specific area of expertise in the clinic, you might formulate a question specifically for them that you know they're going to have a good answer for. And so you're kind of setting them up for success. So you could pose that question to them, and then as they're answering, you want to give them that positive body language. So again, it seems obvious, but it's kind of subtle, and our brains subconsciously pick up on it. So if you're kind of smiling and leaning in and nodding as they're talking, they're going to feel encouraged, and they're going to perhaps have a little less anxiety about speaking to the group in the future. And once they're done, you might want to just highlight some of the key points in their response, things that were great ideas or that are going to have a great impact on the solution finding as you're going through your process planning. Again, just being diligent about ensuring that the meeting norms are observed so that they don't feel bulldozed at any time and that they feel comfortable participating. And again, if there's someone who really just is never comfortable speaking in any group situation, trying to throw in some written brainstorming or working in pairs often helps them to provide their opinions. All right, next slide. And then we often encounter the grouch, the person who's just kind of cynical and negative. And they have lots of barriers for us, lots of reasons why things won't work. And what it's important to recognize is that these grouches, usually their problem with the process is really rooted in anxiety and fear of change. So when we recognize that, it makes it a little bit easier to tolerate personally and realize that it's nothing about you personally. So to address it, sometimes it helps to just allow them to talk about what's really going on. So talk about the positive aspects of the way the clinic is now. What's going on? What's good about it? Have that little discussion. And then maybe talk a bit about what might not be so great about the status quo, about the way things are now, about the way we do screening right now. And then acknowledge that there are some challenges absolutely to any change, but there are also benefits. And in particular, the way we approach change using that PDSA, the model for improvement, it's not like things are going to have huge change overnight. We come up with ideas, we test them out on a very, very small scale, and it's not until we're really sure that this is a process that works, that people feel comfortable with before it becomes a big change. It's so gradual that it's much more comfortable. And also to help reassure them that changes won't be made if they're not something that works. It will only be made if it's tried and tested and proven to be something that's beneficial for the clinic. Definitely not about making more work for people. It's about being more efficient and overall improving patient care. Next slide, please. All right, so we've alluded to this idea of brainstorming, and I'm sure that most of you have done that at some point in your career so far, but sometimes people haven't actually participated in true brainstorming, and often people have not participated in good brainstorming. And I have to say, I put this particular picture in here because one time Sandy had a typo and she called it barnstorming, and so forever in TOP we think of it as barnstorming. So little side note there. All right, on the next slide. So these are some general guidelines for brainstorming, and you would want to clarify these with the group before you got started. It's very important. So it's critical that the group understands that there's going to be no discussion or questions about any of the points that are brought up until the very end. We'll also not be commenting on any of the ideas that come up, whether those comments are positive or negative. They just are for now. Clarification can happen at the very end once we've got all the ideas out. A little silence is okay. Sometimes people just need to ruminate a little bit, because what happens in brainstorming is one idea is put out there, and that might trigger another idea in someone else, and it's kind of builds on itself. So sometimes you need to leave a little bit of quiet in there for people to think. Really important to stress that there are no bad ideas in brainstorming. Again, one bad idea can trigger the next person to have the most brilliant idea, but they wouldn't have had that idea had the other person had not said what they did. And then really encourage them to think outside the box. The whole purpose of brainstorming is to just go crazy. Just think of the most outrageous things. Just let your brain be free, right? Throw it all out there, and then we'll go through and clarify it afterward. Next slide. So as the improvement facilitator, your instructions on how to facilitate effective brainstorming. Your first step is to review those guidelines that I just went over with the group and make sure that they really understand how to do this. Then you want to make sure that you clarify the topic or the issue that you're brainstorming about, because if people are brainstorming different ideas and then you get to the end, it's kind of an all for naught. So make sure it's very clear, and I would write it down somewhere at the top of your Post-it paper. Make sure that it's very clear to people what the topic is, and then give them a couple minutes just to think about it, just to kind of get their thoughts together and think about what direction they're going to go in. And then another important aspect is to set a time limit. So people can often brainstorm for a long time, but you want to make sure that this is kept contained. So it could be a 5-minute brainstorm, it could be a 15-minute brainstorm, but I wouldn't go any longer than that. I think 15 is probably the maximum that you would want to true brainstorming. Then as those ideas are coming up as the improvement facilitator, you're writing them down on the flip chart. If you're just not really clear on what they're saying, just quickly ask if they can rephrase it, or if you need to shorten it a bit, ask them if it's okay to write it in this way. But you want to keep the flow going, so try not to do that if you can. Again, allow for the pause or the silence as people think. Don't jump in, just sit back and wait, because usually more will come. Try not to call on people directly, just allow them to participate as they're comfortable. And if the flow has stopped, if the silence is really getting quite long, you might want to ask a couple probing questions if you think maybe they haven't delved deep enough, or if there's an area maybe they haven't explored yet. And then once you're pretty sure that they're done, or you've reached your time limit, go through the list and clarify things as needed. Sometimes not everyone is understanding what the person meant. So just ask those clarifying questions and write them down. Then you need to go through and vote on the solutions, the ideas, and there will definitely be some that emerge from the group. So you can do this in a number of different ways. We like to use those little sticky dots and give everyone some dots, and then they can go up and put their dots on the ones that resonate with them. And then you just count up the dots, and if you're lucky, you'll have one solution. Usually you have more than one, though. There's often a few that come up as potential solutions to an issue. You can also just do a simple show of hands if you've just got a couple of them there. Again, it takes some of the, you don't ever want anyone to feel like their specific idea is being shot down, so it's just a nice way of keeping it neutral. Okay, next slide, please. So again, if you have a group where people just aren't that comfortable speaking out in the group, you can also brainstorm in written form. So in one simple way, you can hand out Post-it notes or slips of paper. Everybody can write out their ideas on these pieces of paper, and then either one person can collect them and read them all out, or you can just throw them all into the middle of the table and everybody grabs one or two and reads them out, so they're not reading their own and nobody knows which ones belong to whom. We've also done it sometimes when we were having longer meetings where we have people write their ideas down on a piece of paper, wad them up, and then we have a snowball fight, and then you just pick up the snowballs, open them up, and read them out just to kind of release a bit of tension and re-energize people. But in our clinic meetings, usually we don't have more than an hour for sure, so you probably won't need to go to that extent. The other idea is if it's something that's fairly complex and you're thinking maybe it's going to take some time, or maybe you want opinions from those outside the improvement team, you could post the issue or question on a big piece of flip chart paper and leave it posted in a common area, and then just give it a week or so and let people to put their ideas down as they come up. So they've got some time, and sometimes that generates some really interesting ideas because some people just need a little more time to let their brains work on it. Next slide, please. Now, If you've done brainstorming and you end up with a few different options and the team is just kind of stymied, they're not really sure which one to go with, which one to start with, you can use a tool called an impact effort grid. And the idea is that you go over the options one at a time with the group and then ask them if they are high or low impact, if they'll have high or low impact on the clinic or the patient care, the situation, and also if the effort required to do them will be high or low. And then they're placed in the appropriate box. So in box number 1, the idea would have high impact and low effort, so that's a good one and a great one to start with immediately. If it's in box 2, those ones are also worthwhile, but they're challenging. They have high impact and high effort, so they're typically a more major project that they may want to put on the back burner until they have significant time, like maybe that's a summertime project or something like that. The options in box 3 are usually easy to do, but they yield small improvement. So they could do it immediately if they wanted to, or they may choose not to bother because it's not a really high impact thing. Versus in box 4, they're usually difficult without a lot of benefit, and so really you would want to throw those ones out. And sometimes it just really helps clarify to address the options in this manner. Now, this box looks kind of fancy, but if you go to the next slide, I just want you to see that it doesn't have to be a big deal. So you can see on this one, you've just drawn an X on a piece of Post-it note paper. I always call it Post-it note paper, flip chart paper, and you just want to go over with them. On this side, we have impact. So what would be, if we talk about, I should give you the background here. This is an actual real situation with a clinic, and they were talking about how they were going to manage, this is back in the days of FOBT, so the fecal occult blood test, and how they could maybe address that in a better manner. So they had brainstormed lots of ideas, and they were down to kind of 4, and they weren't really sure, and so we put them into the appropriate impact effort boxes. And so what came up was the idea of just giving the verbal instruction to the patient with the requisition. When they really analyzed that, they realized that patients don't always do so great with verbal instructions. And although it's not a lot of effort, it probably won't have a great deal of impact either. So maybe not. If they were to give the requisition with a brief instruction and then follow up with the patient until the test was completed, on the one hand, that might result in a few more people completing the test, but there's a lot of effort involved in that, and probably it would annoy patients in the long run. So that one's probably not what they're going to go with. In the box above that, they talked about putting together FOBT brown bags, so brown paper bags that had the requisition, a glove, and everything that they would need to go home and do the test with a scripted verbal instruction. So whomever was giving them the brown bag would read from a script to give them the instructions on what they needed to do. And while this would probably have high impact, it also was quite a bit of effort because reading that script every time and then putting that bag together every time would take probably too much effort. So in the end, what landed in the high impact, low effort box was having a bunch of pre-assembled FOBT brown bags that included written instructions inside the bag. So they figured that that would have high impact, but it would also require pretty low effort, probably, a fair amount of effort just to get the initial assembling of the bags. But then after that part was done, it would be easy. And so they decided to PDSA that option, the pre-assembled FOBT brown bags, including written instructions. And so that's how that worked for them to help them make a decision. All right, next slide.
So we're going to talk just a little bit more about the whole idea of facilitating effective meetings, and we're going to touch briefly on the action log. So I know lots of meetings, people tend to take minutes, and there are all these lengthy documents with all the meeting minutes in it, everything that went on in the meeting. And then quite often what we find is nobody really goes back and looks at that at those minutes later. So what we've found effective, and we use it ourselves at TOP, is to create an action log. And we'll go on to the next slide, please, Cynthia. We have one here. This does not have to be anything fancy. Once again, this template is on the ASaP website, and it can be sent to your teams electronically, or they can print it off and keep track of it. Now I have a beeping, and I'm hoping it's not my phone going dead, so I'm just going to grab a different line here. Sorry. So what we have on that is that we number the action, and then we put down on that log the date that it was initiated, what the actual action is, and who it was assigned to. So that doesn't necessarily mean that that person has to do all the work around that action, but they're the one that's going to be responsible for getting it done. So usually in that assigned to, we try to have one name. Sometimes it's two, and I notice we sneak that in TOP. But ultimately, if there's one person that's responsible for it, we know who to go back to and talk to. And it's not about you're in trouble, you didn't get the action done. It's what do you need to be successful at this action, and who's ultimately going to make sure that it happens. And a date by when. And you know, we're good at TOP about setting stretch goals. So when are you going to have this done by? That doesn't mean every action is going to be done by the next time, but there's going to be something that has happened. And we just keep track of the status in the last column. And next slide, Cynthia, please. And once again, that can be found on the website under Improvement Facilitation and additional tools. So we do have that available for you to use when you go to your teams or send to your teams to use. Okay, next slide. We're going to talk a little bit more about run charts. This is one of the things when we talk about process measures as we're going along through the ASaP intervention. So we know we do an initial chart review, and we do a follow-up chart review. And once again, those are just a snapshot in time. It's what happens on a daily basis that helps you to get to those outcome measures. So what are the processes that are in place? This, once again, really simple. It doesn't have to be anything complicated, but it is an effective process for assessing the benefit of change. So we're making this change. What are the things that we're doing, and how is it helping us to get to our results? It's easy to monitor, and it's easy to share the results with the rest of the team. So you can do a run chart, and you know, when it starts to look like this run chart is showing some real significant improvement, blow it up, put it on an improvement board, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that at the next training session. Some of you will have heard about it already, but go ahead and put that up so that the teams can see that what they're doing is making a difference. And this, of course, is an important part of the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle, which would be part of the study, is what we're doing making a difference. And the next slide, please, Cynthia. Here's an example of a run chart that we did out for Dr. Doe. So if you remember, Dr. Doe is from the Green Meadow Family Clinic, and this was a very simple run chart that they had done up in the clinic. They started with, this is the number of offers of screening that Dr. Doe does on a daily basis. Where they started was we're doing it at periodic health exams only. And you can see that this one is annotated, and we'll show you where to get a template like this on as well, so that you can download these for your teams. So they started by doing them at periodic health exams only, and they gradually started adding more patients every day. And once again, they tried that slow, starting small, and they only added a patient every day for a while. And you can see how the gradual increase of adding those offers of screening. So gradually adding more patients every day, that was part of their PDSA plan. And then they have this big dip down about January the 20th, and so they annotated it by saying that there had been a staff member that was away on holidays, and when she came back, she wasn't told it was her job to keep track of how many patients are being screened every day. So they dropped to 0. So that was, but at least they knew why. They were able to educate that staff member and pop up to where they left off the next day. And I think on the next slide, Cynthia, we have, so this is the run chart that I've been using off of the internet. And if you there was such a long title, but if you search run chart Excel template, this is one of the ones that you'll see, and it shows you so easily how to put in the date, what was collected, what the goal was, and this clinic is specifically looking to get that up to 20 patients a day that they were screening. And you can see at the bottom there's just the little text boxes that you can pop into place to put the annotation in.
And Sandy, I was just going to add,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to add, in case anyone's kind of wondering, that where it says median, you don't have to calculate that. When you plug in the value, it will automatically calculate the median for you, so you don't have to do math, which is always nice.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, it's very simple, and if anybody can't find this run chart, I have a copy of it. I've saved a copy of it, so you could ask your CPA or put a note on Yammer and ask anyone if they have a template that they're using, and I'm sure the rest of the facilitators will be happy to share that with you. All right, next slide.
And actually, just another note on the run charts, just to give people an idea of how simple they really can be. They're so easy to do. And so as another example, there's a clinic that was doing a PDSA of giving patients a little slip of paper where they could fill in themselves what their weight was, what their alcohol use was, their tobacco status, and so just asked some questions, and the patient just filled in the sheet. And so they were concerned about, I don't know if we'll remember often enough to give this little sheet out. That might be an issue. And so a very simple way to measure that is to say, okay, well, we'll do it for a day, and at the end of the day, count up the number of little sheets that you have back. So it would be they'd have to make sure that they specified where the sheets would go once they'd been inputted into the patient chart, and then how many patients were in that day. So you've got, let's say that they had 20 sheets back at the end of the day and 32 patients had been in to the clinic. Then their run chart, they could very quickly figure out what percentage of patients per day had been seen. And of course, our goal is never 100%, so maybe they just want to chart how many patients overall they've seen. And so really very easy to plug those numbers into this template and generate a nice graph, and it's so visually pleasing to see that maybe when they started off they were only remembering about a quarter of the time, but within a week it was becoming kind of habit, and their number line is climbing, and it's very motivating for people and simple to do. So just keep that in mind when you're working with your group.
Yeah, I think thanks, Michelle. That's a really good point. I know there's a clinic, too. I think, Monica, you're on the line, and I know that you had a clinic that was really excited about seeing their run chart, that it really motivated them to say, oh, look, we are doing something. We are making a difference. And I think that those are those wins that you want to get with your teams, is they can see things on a chart, on a graph like that. I think it's a real positive.
Mm-hmm. Makes it kind of real. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So another important aspect of an effective team meeting is to make sure that you actually close the meeting. And it's easy to just say, okay, time's up, see you next time. But really, if you can ask the person who's been keeping the action log to maybe summarize what actions have been written for the next meeting. And then as the facilitator, take a moment to find something positive that happened in the meeting. Again, it's you don't want to seem cloying and obvious about it, but just find a way to end on a positive note to reinforce to the team what great work they're doing. Even if it's something really small that you can pick out, like how many of them actually showed up to the meeting, fantastic. Find some positive thing that you can comment on at the end. Make sure that you're always celebrating accomplishments, big and small. Really important to keep people motivated and knowing that their work is recognized. And then at the very end, you can confirm with everybody when the next meeting day and time will be. And so it's a very deliberate closing of the meeting. And the last slide. So in summary, we just want to make sure everyone really understands that we are all in this together, this facilitation field, and we really encourage everyone. A lot of you are great facilitators, and you bring with you a wealth of information already. And maybe you have some tried and true techniques and tools that you've used in the past, and we would love it if you would share those with us either on Yammer, or if there's something that's not easily shared on Yammer, we can find a venue for you, for instance, a webinar. So please let us know. And facilitation is a very broad field, and we've just touched on a little corner of it today. You can go really deep into it as you get more skilled and more comfortable. But the idea is that as a facilitator, you have knowledge of a whole bunch of different tools and techniques that you just sort of pull out as needed depending on the situation. As you're just starting, though, don't worry about it. It's all learned through experience and having the courage to try new things and sharing with others. So this is where we can talk to each other on Yammer. You know, I tried this technique. It didn't work out that great. Has anyone done this successfully? So we can really get some good discussion going there. And as Sandy said, as an improvement facilitator, your goal ultimately is always to facilitate your way out of a job. So just like the shepherd there who's trained the dog so well that he doesn't even have to be involved in herding the sheep, the dog can do it himself or herself. So always remember that you don't want your team to rely on you. You want to slowly be teaching them to fish, right? So that when you leave, they're a self-sufficient team that can carry on with QI work after your time is done with them. All right, we've got about, I think, 4 or 5 minutes left. Does anyone have any questions before we sign off for the weekend? All right, I think that's
if anybody has any experiences that they've had with their team so far, either doing run charts or facilitating meetings that they want to share with the group, even if it isn't a question, anything that's been a positive or a challenging experience for you.
Well, I think it's 3:30 on a Friday, so yeah, I think we need to celebrate the fact that people actually showed up for the webinar. So good for you.
Yeah, thanks very much for taking this time out of your Friday afternoon to join us. And if anything does come up because of that, talk to your clinical process advisor or post something on Yammer. We'd love to see some discussion going around to facilitation.
Right. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you next webinar.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye. Thank you.